and welcome back to the Masters of Modern Top 15 Modern Cards from Wilds of Eldraine, the newest set from Magic the Gathering, Wizards of the Coast. You have two Magic ambassadors here telling you what's good. There are a ton of powerful cards in this, and there's definitely going to be some misses. I can tell you right now with the adventure mechanic, it's really hard to always evaluate how good or bad something is, especially in how it relates to stuff like Cascade. But we have our selection of what we think are the best 15 cards in the set for Modern. And probably Pioneer. Generally, that's how that escalates. And we're excited to do it. If you don't know, I'm Alex Kessler, and Ben Bateman is here with me. We've been doing this podcast for a long time. We're excited to break down the large history of knowledge of this format and see how some of these Wilds of Eldraine cards are going to do. It's an interesting, top 15s for Modern has been really interesting recently, just because recent years, because the power level since the Modern Horizon sets have spiked so much. The chances that a card is playable in the Modern format is significantly dropped. So even if a third of these 15 cards see real Modern play, I'd be pretty hyped and excited. But I do think these 15 cards will have a chance, and we're pretty hyped to go over them.
Yes, very much so. Excited to be back with you. Obviously disappointed to have missed a few weeks here, but some stuff going on that I had to clear through, and I am now back doing this. I think your point about the Modern impact of these cards is really interesting, because where it used to feel like there was a potential for the top 10 cards of a set to all have a shot, what it feels like now, because of Modern's power level, is that one of the 2 to 3 marquee cards in the set will have an impact. And then the other cards that will have an impact will be 1 to 2 commons or uncommons that will be sideboard cards. That's almost always how it works now, is that there'll be a cool 1 mana artifact that, is an uncommon, that graveyard effects or something. Or there'll be a 1 mana, I'm trying to think like the effects that often, like a collector oof sort of a thing, like something that's very marginal that you bring in as a 1 or a 2 of, that's like a common or an uncommon. And I feel like that's basically what you get now. You have it's unlikely that the 5th best rare or mythic in the set will make an impact on Modern. It's far more likely.
I think there's normally 1 or 2 cards that are engine building, and at once every 2 sets there's a 1 card that's a staple in the format now. And then I agree, it then drops down to what either niche strategy does this card go into, or what type of cool versatile removal spell. I mean that is one interesting thing about Eldraine, just from a mechanical perspective, is 2 of the big mechanics for the set, Adventure and Bargain, are Modern viable conversations, right?
They have interactions with things that have been classically powerful, I think, is your point, that the sacrifice for value can be a plus in a lot of Modern's best decks, combined with the cascade sort of meets mana cost value thing of Adventure. I think I told you before we started, my big takeaway from all the 2-color Adventure cards, which we're going to get to several of, I think, is that I don't know how many of them have the juice to be Modern, but they're all very cool, grindy cards in a way that I pay attention to. I like a lot of the cards from the set. I would say that my first reaction to the set is I really enjoy it. I think that the design of the main set is phenomenal. I think flavorfully it's incredible. I think there's a lot of very cool cards. And additionally, I think that the enchantment sheet, the Mystical Archive, so to speak, is a really great sheet. And I have some thoughts on that when we get into it later. But I think that overall, the pack opening experience, very great. And I think that the cards themselves, very enjoyable to play. So a lot of exciting things to say about this set.
Yeah, and if you're looking to pick up this set after a review, or because you're just hyped to buy product, there's a link in the description of this episode that has links to the MTG Ambassador page where you can buy product, and there's one for me and one for Ben, and you can decide which of those 2 you want to use to vote for with your heart on who's your favorite, whose takes this episode were your favorite. And then last but not least.
What a subversive villain Alex just was.
And last but not least, I'm just saying I have a child, and I need and last but not least, obviously, please hit that like and subscribe button, because that's what you're supposed to do. If you don't do it, it means you're a jerk. So you got to hit that like and subscribe and thumbs up button. And then please comment if there's a card we didn't talk about that you wish we talked about as part of Seeing Play in Modern or maybe missed. Make sure to comment it below because we'll recover it. Any messages we missed, we'll cover in the next episode. All right, number 15, Ben. And this one we'll see. But it comes from a long line of similar cards that eventually there's got to be enough of these to make like a teamer deck that breaks the format. And that's Agatha of the Vile Cauldron. Red, green, 2 mana, 1/1, legendary creature, human warlock. Activate abilities of creatures you control cost X less to activate, where X is Agatha of the Vile Cauldron's power. This effect can't reduce the mana in that costs to less than 1 mana. And then she has an ability 4 red green, which is ostensibly a 5 mana ability, 3 red green. Other creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample and haste until end of turn. So if you make Agatha bigger, that +1/+1 and trample and haste until end of turn ability gets cheaper and cheaper. But this what's the blue green makes cards less expensive?
Oh, sure. It's not Simic Ascendancy. It's like the same. It's the same time period though. Biomancer's something, Mirth or something. Biomancer's
Biomance. I'm googling it because I should have known this ahead of time. Biomancer's Familiar. So Biomancer's Familiar is blue-green for a mutant creature, 2/2. Activated creatures you control cost 2 less to activate. And then obviously there's always been Training Grounds. But I feel like
Zirda, don't forget Zirda. The Zirda is the other one. That's like, so this is the fourth instance.
Yeah, Zirda out of the command zone. I think the problem with Zirda is just like, well, no, it's red. So yeah, you could play, and both Biomancer's Familiar has a tap ability and Agatha has an activated ability. So you could play in Modern a Zirda plus these two deck that's trying to accomplish this. Now, Zirda can play with, let me confirm. But you can have instant sorceries, right? Each permanent card in your starting deck. So you could play like a cool collected company, activated abilities aren't as expensive, go infinite shenanigans style deck here, which I think is pretty sweet.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I think so. So back in the day, I think before the printing of Zirda, maybe after Biomancer's Familiar, there was a deck I was trying to build at one point that was utilizing Pack Rat. It's one of my favorite reduce the activated ability cards, because obviously if you're able to generate black, Pack Rat is really quite good, right? It means like whatever is in your hand at that point, if you can get all black mana, if you have any of the Training Grounds abilities on the stack or in play, I should say, you can just pay the 2 or the 3 or the 4 mana to make whatever version of that. So if you have 4 cards, 4 mana, now you're making 16 power end of turn. So at that, I think I was playing the Nicol Bolas creature that flips into a Planeswalker, because the flip ability reduction of 2 makes it like curve into 4 to 5. That was my idea way back in the day when I was doing it. Now there's so many more options, but more than the reduction abilities, I think what it really comes down to is what are the really good activated abilities where the cost reduction is going to win the game. That's the thing, is like
my personal favorite is Eldrazi Displacer.
Yeah. Okay, the blinking for 1 white, that's really good.
And if you have a ETB of an ability that produces mana, right, that you're able to blink and it has haste of some variety, you're able to do it quickly, like, or any tap ability, you start going infinite, right? Like,
sure. Is there a white? Does Displacer need colorless too, or does it need white?
Yes, it's colorless. It's a colorless mana that you need to be able to blink it.
So you need an ETB that's giving you 1 colorless mana, basically.
Yeah, or an untap a land ability or something like that. Yes. So like if you have I'm trying to remember which card it is. I think is it Scrib Ranger?
Ooh, are you that's
that returns a land. There's an infinite combo with it, and I'm trying to remember which one it is.
I mean, any of the like Bound and Crisis, like any of the Splinter Twin ones that can untap a permanent, those all do it.
Yeah. So like a cool Splinter Twin activated ability. Oh, the deck that I'm used to playing with it in like Commander does it with just straight up Derevi in play, lets you do it. But yes, anything that lets you untap a permanent when it enters the battlefield with the land, you get infinite ETB abilities, and then you can start doing shenanigans with it. But I think like that's it. Like there's other things, and hopefully people are screaming in the comments on ways to go infinite with like, but having 2 of this effect, right? That's what's interesting to me is the fact that you can now play with a full 8. They're both 2 mana abilities. They're both relatively decent bodies. Obviously, Agatha is a 1/1, but if you can get it to be a little bit bigger, which isn't that hard to do,
Sure.
it starts kind of getting out of hand. And then play around it. Now, obviously, with Agatha specifically, it being eaten by a Bowmaster isn't the best thing on the planet, but that's why I do like Biomancer, because Biomancer is a 2/2, so you at least start with one of your things being able to be resilient to that, and now you have redundancy, and you add the fact that Zerta can be in the companion zone in a deck like this, really starts making it really interesting.
I think this is like on the radar of cards that have potential because of redundancy, but there's not a deck that's obvious that I think one of us see yet. I think I'm good. That's kind of where I'm at.
All right, next card on the list is Sir Ginger, the Meal Ender. 2 mana, 3/1 Food Knight, legendary artifact creature. Meal Ender has trample, hexproof, and haste as long as your opponent controls a planeswalker. So take that, Renin 6. Whenever another artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Sir Ginger and scry 1. Pay 2, tap it, sacrifice. She is a food token, so you can sacrifice her to gain 3 life. I actually think this card, like in the like actual affinity, thought monitor type affinity decks, I think this card's really sick. It like is good against what other people are trying to do or it's like good against Renin 6, which I think is really important. It's good against Teferi. There are definitely some good planeswalkers that are out there. A 2 mana 3/1 with haste against the Teferi is actually pretty powerful. And then add the fact that like it has really, really good synergies with doing whatever Ravager wants to be doing, is like a really cool, powerful capabilities. Now that deck, actual power level isn't super high, but a shot in the arm like this could help it a lot. And obviously, as a value option for the format, I think it's really good.
Yeah, I think the thing about this card that stands out to me is that there are enough ways to mitigate the whenever another artifact you control is like there are enough like lesser master core sort of like persist type of things you could build into a deck that would allow this creature to go infinite as a win con. And also the scry 1 is really, really, really good. Like if you go infinite, you make it infinite big and also draw whatever card you need, right? Like if you're going to scry the whole deck. So I think what you're saying on the front end is very powerful. I mean, I know we're not in commander zone, but this card does get me excited as a commander because I always am looking at the new colorless commanders because I want to build more of them, and I haven't loved any of them. The new Eldrazi are good, but this is exciting. I think this card's great. Plus, it's just like a Shrek character so clearly.
Yeah, and obviously, like it's supposed to hint at like food tokens being sacrificed or treasure tokens being sacrificed, which are things that are happening. But I do think it's like a really good. I think it's like has a real potential to see play in modern. It has like multiple effects that are really good, and the fact that it has haste against planeswalkers and protection from the fact that it's a 3/1, it still has protection from things, I think is really powerful.
Agreed.
Next on the list is Charming Scoundrel, 1 and a red, 1/1 human rogue haste. When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a card, then draw a card. You can create a treasure token, or you can create a wicked roll token attached to target creature you control. So when it enters the battlefield, it has a ETB trigger of creating 2 permanents for 2 of its options. You either get a artifact out of it or an enchantment token out of it. When it comes with an enchantment token, it's now a 2/2. But then obviously being able to loot on a creature that has haste has a lot of benefits as well in the format.
Yeah, so the 2 mana 1/1, the 2 mana, that loots, that creates a treasure, those are both strong. I think probably as time goes on and I get more used to Wicked Roll, maybe I'll feel differently. But at the moment, I think it's the weakest design of the set. I just like the complication of it. I don't like that there's like more than one roll thing. It just feels a little like not as clean as I wish the design was. That being said, it's probably better than I think it is, and the first 2 abilities on this card are both quite good. So a 2 mana 1/1 that makes a treasure like on enter is like pretty good, right? Like the fact that if the card ETBs and makes a mana, there's a lot of things you can do with this card. Like it has combo built into it, basically just on the front end, and then the back end is that like you can loot. And I think the wicked roll thing is probably the least significant part of this card. Like as the moment,
I mean, it comes in as a 2 mana 2/2 with haste, right? That when it dies, it does 1 damage to an opponent. So like ignore the like enchantment token mechanic perspective, but
sure.
giving a red an ability to like on the front end, this has a body that is both aggressive and then also if you interact with it, punishes you. And I think that's like the standard what that role is really doing, right? I would look at it less as like a wicked role token and more as the when this enters the battlefield, you could put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and then that creature gains if it dies, do 1 damage to target player.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, from a like perhaps the mono red perspective, there's maybe this plays in that as well, right? Like
I mean, like Charming Prince, which is what this card is a play off of, has seen a ton of play. Not a ton of play, I guess is a strong word, but has been a good role player throughout its being printed, and this feels very similar to that. Next card is Cruel Somnophage. 1 and a black, nightmare. Has adventure. The adventure side is Can't Wake Up. 1 blue, adventure, sorcery. Target player mills 4 cards. And then the front end is its power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards. So I know, Ben, you love a blue black mill beatdown strategy. So I don't think I was allowed to not include this on our list, though that is why it's still not in the top 10.
I do like this card. It plays on a couple cards that I like. Obviously, White of Precinct 6, the old Gatecrash card, black one for a 1/1 zombie, gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your opponent's graveyard, as well as Jace's Phantasm are 2 cards that I'd classically tried to use in decks. This feels like it's playing in the same deck. There is a card called Nihilith from Future Sight, which is a black 1 suspend 4/4 fear. Whenever a card is put into your opponent's graveyard from anywhere, remove a counter, a suspend counter. And suspend, as you guys know, when the last counter is removed, the creature comes in haste. So plays really well with this card, right? Like if you suspend your Nihilith on turn 2, and then on turn 3, you play the front half of this card, your Nihilith is now a 4/4 creature on turn 3 that has haste with fear. And now this card is sitting in your suspend zone, your exile zone, that when it comes down, probably it's going to be decent because you've now played the front half already. I would say that like the Jace's Phantasm, like all of that stuff, like I doubt there's a deck that's going to be modern playable with all that stuff. And the biggest reason is because Graveyard Hate destroys the deck. But this is another card that plays into that style. And I used to try to play that deck. I like tried building it for a long time. This is a perfect example of what I was saying earlier, where all the multicolor adventure cards are super grindy in a way that's like very cool and very fun. I'm just not totally sure if the grindy, cool, like value engine is strong enough to be modern anymore.
The thing that's interesting enough for me with this card in modern is that mill is viable in modern, right? They're like blue black mill is a mill deck in modern that sees play. It's always on the cusp of the top 20 decks in the format. And you know, that deck has some weaknesses. One of those weaknesses is that if there's some way to not die to mill, right? Do they have an Eldrazi in their deck, or do they have some other way to kind of recycle cards and make it so that the mill plan is not a great option? And this card does let you play the blue 1 mill 4 cards. It's a little bit sub-rate mill spell, but it's not terrible, right? The mill decks have played worse mill effects than that. But it comes with this option of a B plan, which you never have to cast. You never have to cast the Somnophage, but having one of this in your deck does give you the option of, you know, oh, I need a threat right now, or I need a blocker, or I need something to do with this moment. So it does give those decks, which previously, like, because most of the beatdown-y cards that you'd want to include are like, this card does the beatdown if you're doing a mill strategy, but it doesn't come with the mill needed to make it happen.
I think
it does come with both, and you don't have to cast either half if it doesn't make sense in a matchup.
I think your point that is the most sound here is that you play one of these. I think the thing about that's really strong, and I respond to, is the front half of this card being in a mill deck as anything more than a one of is bad because the rate's not good enough. But the back half being in the deck as okay, so actually what's happened is they've figured out a way to run me out of cards, or I haven't gotten the job done, and I've milled, 65% of the deck. Oh, this 2 mana card I just drew is a 17/17.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I'll play it. So
I have now cast the Abyss, and if you don't block it, you die. I'm in a similar. I agree. All right. So the last card, and I've kind of ranked these in like the 5 like it's by fives. They're not in order, but like the first we're rounding out the teens and the end out the teens, because I think this is probably the worst of the 5 we just talked about, is Gumdrop Poisoner. 2 black human warlock creature, lifelink. When Gumdrop Poisoner enters the battlefield, up to 1 target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life you've gained this turn, 3/2. But on the front end, it has 1 black, create a food token instant. So it has the instant side adventure of being able to generate a food token in black for 1 mana, which has a library of benefits, and then also has the ability to kill a creature on ETB, gain life, and just a life linking 3/2 for 3 with some upside.
I think this card is pretty bad. I think
it's the weakest on the list that people brought up.
Yeah, I think it's pretty bad. I think the idea that like what you're talking about is that because a food token for 1 black in the right deck is okay, it's fine, but you have to spend 2 to gain the life. You gain 3, correct? That's what the food is, gain 3, not gain 2. It's gain
Correct.
3, right? So now you're gonna you're gonna pay 2 and then pay 3. So for 5 mana, you'll have spent the turn to -3/-3 a creature and get a 3/2 creature out of it. Like, I know it's all contained in 1 card. It just, for modern, that doesn't feel good enough. That feels like a good limited card. That feels like there's a life gain deck probably that exists in Pioneer that probably will take advantage of this. But for modern, I think it's no bueno.
It's a miss. Yeah, I agree. Okay, now we're in the top 10. We've upgraded ourselves to the top 10, and at the top of the top 10 we have Hearth Elemental, 5 and a red creature elemental. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard that are instance cards, sorcery cards, and or have an adventure. 4/5. It also has an adventure ability, Stroke of Genius. 1 and a red adventure, discard your hand, then draw 2 cards. So this card's being talked a lot about in like Hollow One decks, because you like very quickly could on turn 2 pay 2 mana, discard your hand, draw Hollow Ones, having discarded Vengevines, then cast a Vengevine, and now cast a Hollow One, and now you have like 2 Vengevines and play a Hollow One and Hearth Elemental. You get to cast on your next turn for like 1 red, because you have instants and sorceries in your graveyard that you've been able to cast and discard. So like it has an pretty easy home to enter. Both sides of it play really well into what that deck is trying to do. And then also just there's a history of 1 mana 4/5s that are good when you have instants and sorcery spells in your graveyard being good.
Yeah, I mean, like I think on the front end, the fact that it's 2 mana to discard your hand, draw 2, like that already plays at rate with a lot of the cards that have been powerful in those decks you're talking about. It doesn't feel like it's out of place. So you're measuring rate one way or another, trying to decide which one you should play. But the upside is quite high. And like Hollow One obviously being the best example of it. But anytime, it feels like Rhinos is the same. It feels like the sweet spot is basically 4 power for a marginal effect that you can cheat, is like nowadays in modern, the sweet spot of this card is good enough.
Yeah. And the fact that it's a 4/5 too, so it blocks Rhino tokens, it blocks, a lot of the big threats in the format. Like the effect on turn 3 in Hollow One, like on turn 3 in Vengevine decks or in the Hollow One decks, this can very easily, for 2 mana, you cast it, you discard some Vengevines and some instants and sorceries. On turn 1 and 2, you cast some instants and sorceries to get to that point anyways. You then draw 2 cards, and then you can cast Hearth Elemental for 1, because you've like getting 5 instant sorceries in your graveyard wasn't very hard. And you now have, for 3 mana on 1 card, got your double Vengevine trigger for already, right? You don't need, and like, or a Hollow One that you drew off of it, right? Like it's not that hard to imagine this being pretty easy to start that engine off by itself, which that deck loves, right? Because one of the problems that deck has is if it runs out of gas, it's just like,
yeah,
oh, I don't have anything. But if you draw this late game, you now draw 2 cards, and you ostensibly draw 3 cards for 2 mana, right? You draw 4/5 for 1, and whatever 2 cards you draw. I really like this card.
I think in the old days, if you think about the things that 6-7 years ago were dominant in modern, that were like the best cards, Delver in the old days, right? 1 mana for a conditional 3 power flyer, Prized Amalgam in the Dredge decks, right? You think about the cards that like really got you some value, have now been upgraded and replaced by a Cascade card that gets you 2 4/4s, right? Like that's like what a good rate of something unfair is now. I think that's kind of what we're dealing with, is that like the best example of the old thing not being good is that if I play Delver on turn 1 and it flips every time, it's borderline good enough, but I'd rather have Channeler, Dragon Rage Channeler, because the effect that it has on the board and what it gets me in card selection is just better than having 3 power on turn 1. So like just having 3 or less power for, 1 mana kind of a thing isn't really good like it used to be. That's where I think your point on this card is strong, and that I think it sort of aiding Hollow One makes sense, but we're not just talking about this like it's an obvious top tier card. It's like, could the deck take advantage of it?
Hopefully. Well, yeah, it's interesting because I think this card is like playable even outside of that, right? Like I think like a blue-red Murktide deck doesn't hate this effect. Now I think it has other things that it's doing that are slightly more powerful than what this card is doing. But as a value option for players wanting to join in the Modern, if you want to build basically what the Murktide deck is, but don't want to spend $80 on Murktides, you can play this card pretty easily. Or if you have a deck that wants to do that type of strategy, but then wants to keep the spells in the graveyard for whatever reason, right? Like Murktide does have the problem that it eats your graveyard when you play it. If you want to keep your graveyard large, this plays really well into those strategies. Stuff like Dredge is another example where this could be really powerful because of the front end. Just the 2 mana, discard your hand, draw 2 cards is really good in Dredge. Like discard Stinkweed Imp, Dredge Stinkweed Imp is really powerful. And then in your Adventure Zone, you have a 1 mana 4/5, which is really powerful. Like I think it's a lot more versatile than like maybe it looks like on the front, because it looks like just like a dumb limited card. And I can see it seeing a lot of different play and being really surprised on its viability in the format. All right, so next card on the list is Rowan, Scion of War. 1 black-red legendary creature, human wizard, 4/2. 3 mana, 4/2 menace. You may tap her. Spells you cast this turn that are black and or red cost X less to cast, where X is the amount of life you lost this turn. Activate this ability only as a sorcery. Now, this is seeing a lot of talk in CDH circles, in the sense that as a commander, if you cast Ad Nauseam with this in play, and then you tap it, your deck is basically free at that point, or every spell only costs 1 mana that you have left. But I do think there's arguments for stuff like Grizzlebrand. Like any black and red spell costs X less, and it's just how much life you lost that turn. Like Grizzlebrand goes off if you can get this. Like the fact that this makes Grizzlebrand on turn 4 into a 4-drop, as long as you have some way to pay life, or some spell that loses you life, or other large beater effects that you can ramp out with this, but then help chain into storm win conditions, I think is like really interesting.
My thing I've always noticed with cards like this and effects like this is that past a certain mana value, so at 3 mana without haste, this card requires you to be playing a bunch of cards that, if you don't have Rowan in play, are a little more expensive than they should be. Unless you're going dedicated combo, like you get Rowan in play, and now all of the cards in your deck are going to be like crazy powerful for crazy cheap. The problem is, if you don't draw Rowan in that deck, like if you don't have this card in play ready to activate, doesn't get disrupted, your deck's horrible. And that's the problem I've always run into with any cost reducer deck and any cost reducer card, is you kind of have to toe the line of playing cards that are playable without the cost reduction. Remember back in the day when I used to like try to build that Goblin Electromancer Baral deck, where you would play Lingering Souls on turn 3 and then you'd flashback Souls the same turn, because you had like the 1 mana cost reducer on turn 2.
Yep.
I always ran into the same problem, which was like, I basically want to play cards that cost 1, but because of the theme of this deck, I have to play cards that like get me a little bit of marginal value for costing 2 or 3 that I can cast for 1 here. Mm-hmm. And I always was like, if the opponent kills the cost reducer, or I don't draw it, this is just a deck of cards that cost 1 to 2 too much. And I kind of look at this and think, because it costs 3, it's really hard to count on this effect. It's big enough and scalable, but like you said with Grizzlebrand, there's like, you could get 1 payoff and it wins the game kind of a thing. But that's my concern.
Yep. No, I don't disagree. I think like it scales really well. It does something really powerful, but it does lose like 3 mana for something that you can't do until the next turn is like really weak, I think. And like, I think a lot of people are talking about it right now, but I don't think it has as viability. But I can imagine that there is a moment where this card becomes a little bit more playable, depending on the shells that exist, and if it makes that shell stronger. Okay, next card is Mosswood Dread Knight. 1 green, human knight. Trample. When Mosswood Dreadnought dies, you may cast it from your graveyard as an adventure until at the end of your next turn. There are 3/2 for 2, and interestingly enough, have adventure, which works with its ability. Dread Whispers, 1 in a black sorcery adventure. You may draw a card and lose a life. So you talking about very grindy options.
This is the definition, right? This is the card. Like it's
this is the grindy card where you have a trampling 2 mana 3/2 that if it dies on your turn, if it dies until your next turn, you can play it to draw a card and then pay it again. So for 4 mana every turn, you get a 3/2 blocker, draw a card, lose a life, and that blocker can turn around and become a 3/2 trampler. As far as rate goes, 2 mana for a 3/2 trample is fine. It's not like saving anyone's life, but if you have any way of making him bigger, obviously that scales really well up. It's the Green Knight reference, and yeah.
So I think this card for me, actually, weirdly, because this is not usually what I talk about, I think everything you said is correct. It's very cool. The like cyclical nature of the card, the grindy nature. Exactly what I mean when I say I think in Pioneer, this could find a place because it feels like it's just value heavy enough that it reminds me of old school modern Jund cards, where it's like, there's probably 7 other cards that fill the spot, but maybe this is the one you want to play and it'll work. But from a flavor perspective, just the art and like this idea that it's this like ethereal dead knight that's coming up from like the moss and the greenery, and like the way it looks and feels to me is very cool. That's actually the thing about the card I respond to the most. It feels like something very much out of like
it is. It's from an Arthurian legend poem, right?
You're saying it's from the Green Knight, the Dev Patel film.
Yeah. Well, that film is based off of the Arthurian. It's like an old like middle like Dark Ages poem, right?
So it is distinctly based on like a legend, which is like very. I think for me that's the part about this card that feels the coolest. It like
I think I agree that modern viability on this card is really low. Like the deck that probably would want something like this the most is Yawgmoth decks, right? It gives like a value sack outlet that draws you cards, but I think it's just not good enough for that deck. But I do think it's like a very cool thing to be doing in Pioneer. The next card on our list, Kellen the Fey Blooded. 2 red legendary creature, human fairy, 2/2, double strike. Other creatures you control get +1/+1 or +1/+0 for each aura and equipment attached to Kellen the Fey Blooded. But they have an adventure and they have a birthright boon. 1 in a white sorcery adventure. Search your library for an aura or equipment card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle. So an equipment tutor or an aura tutor, you're able to find the thing you need, but it comes with the creature you need, and that creature is very good to have for a card that adds an equipment to it. In Modern, we obviously have the 1 mana version of finding an equipment. Doesn't find an aura. An aura doing that is pretty different and has a lot more versatility to it because auras can be removal spells. Like you can have a pacifism not being very good, but there are removal spells that are enchantment auras that are relatively interesting to be able to find. But add the ability to then have a double striking 3 mana 2/2 lord basically in the deck to then take the thing that you found and attach it to it, or to put into play and have a hammer attach themselves to and kill someone with just hammer and kill them by themselves.
The card that makes this most interesting for me, like the single card that makes this card really sing in Modern, is this white aura from Horizons 1 called On Thin Ice. On Thin Ice, snow enchantment aura. Enchant snowland you control. When On Thin Ice enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. So it's a 1 mana Oblivion Ring effect for a creature that has to target a snowland. But this card, Kellen, is only a 2-color centric card. So having snowlands is not a big problem. Like Arid Mesa gets you either one. There's enough versatility there that I can see that working. The fact that on the front end of this card, it's probably trying to get you something to win the game with, but also with multiples of these in your hand, you can just like, I'm going to search up my like sorcery speed path to exile is pretty strong. I don't know how wide the deck goes where the other creatures getting +1/+0 matters as much. Maybe there might be cards that are like more significant than I think, but I think that like having a double strike creature that's a 2/2, that if you put the right equipment on it, like you said, hammer, it can just win the game on its own, is strong. And I think the fact that the aura clause is included in the front end of this card means that like specifically getting on thin ice to me is the thing, because that means now you have access as your backup of a 1 mana sorcery, kill any creature. And I think that's really strong. And we haven't seen Steel Shaper's Gift have the versatility of getting that card yet. So that's where this jumps out to me.
Yeah, I think like it's the thing with adventures, right? The fact that they come with a back end, if the front end is playable, and this is on the verge of playable in a deck like Hammer Time, and the fact that it's slightly less playable than another option that's available, but comes with this backup plan, makes it, especially as a one of, like such a great versatile option that like there are going to be games where this buys you a win. And I think that's definitely a reason to always look at cards like this. The next card is Scalding Viper, 1 and a red, elemental snake. Whenever an opponent casts a spell with mana value 3 or less, Scalding Viper deals 1 damage to that player, 2/1, but it has an adventure. Steam Clean, 1 blue adventure. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. This feels like it has Ben Bateman written all over it. It feels like it's a 2 mana spell that punishes their opponent for casting cheap things, and in the meantime can be a removal spell for a tempo purposes if that's what you need.
I have this card in a Highlander deck already. I have the foil version that I opened in my Eldraine product, and I have to tell you, I was very excited. It looks great. A lot of the art in this set, beautiful. The art on this card is incredible. So the foil was really exciting to open. I don't love the sorcery speed, bouncing on land permanent. Like, it's a very weak effect, but like it's good enough, because the back half of this card just being like a 2 mana 2/1 with, deals damage. You know where this card actually went for me? Like the number one place this went? One of my Gerson Starn commander deck.
Sure.
Because dealing 1 exactly on the back half of the creature, the 2 mana 3/1, was so good that like the front half was just like totally a marginal effect. The back half is like anytime a player plays anything, they take 3. Seems incredibly good. So I feel like all of the things I love about this card are a little too expensive for Modern. It makes me sad, but it would have to have, like, the front half would have to cost 1, or the back half would have to have some bonus. It's like good, but just doesn't quite cross the line for me to be like, this card is amazing.
I think its biggest weakness is that it's an X1, right? If this is a 2 mana 2/2, I think it's actually Modern playable. But the fact that it just dies to a Bowmaster that looks at it is like pretty regrettable. I think that like otherwise it would have easy potential to do some significant damage to an opponent. I do think I like how Steam Clean and its front ability kind of work against each other, where like you almost want to play like Scalding Viper as early as possible and ignore the adventure. But if you draw Scalding Viper late game and the adventure is available, you now can use it to bounce something that's expensive that wouldn't necessarily have triggered Scalding Viper, right? Like it almost is like the reverse of what adventure cards normally are, which I think is kind of cool. You don't always want to go on the adventure and then cast it. Sometimes you just want to cast it, and then sometimes you want the adventure, and then casting it is just a relatively mediocre option. So it's almost more split card than anything else.
I was going to say I would sort of agree that I think that the creature side of this is probably as good as any of the adventure cards in the set have been so far, to the point that I think actually if this was, like I think you said it a second ago, but if this existed without the adventure half, it's almost playable anyway.
Yeah. And then the adventure half gives it a really good late game play, which I think I like. Exactly. And if you bounce their 3-drop, then it's perfect, right? You on turn 4, you bounce their 3-drop, and then you have a 2/1. If they cast their 3-drop, they lose a life. And then you're like, haha, I've tempoed you and hurt you. All right, so that's the middle ground, and now we're in the top 5. And before you get to the top 5, I do want to shout out our patrons. If you can check that out, you get the you get this episode with a bunch of bonus content ahead of time early, so you can check all of that out at patreon.com/MMcast. And then please make sure to follow us on all of the social medias, Twitter, TikTok. The MMcast has a TikTok now. Ben's been doing a lot of content for that, as has Renee, who's been on the cast a few times, and we do a lot of fun stuff there as well. So make sure to check all of that stuff out. And then, of course, if you're looking to buy Wilds of Eldraine again, We have links in the bio where you can figure out which one between me and Ben you like more. You can pick which Bitly link you click on and get some cool trade stuff. It has a store locator, so if you want to know where a store near you is, or if you want to just buy stuff online, it helps you there as well.
And
all right.
Additionally, before we move on, I do want to remind everybody here, Alex and I are going to be in Vegas, MagicCon Vegas. It's like this amazing thing we're doing. It's so much fun to go to these shows, but this is a big one because the last two MagicCons, the last two, I've gone to, and I have not gotten to go with Alex. So when we go together, it's a totally different thing. Obviously, the whole podcast is there. Getting to meet folks, play games together. It's a very cool thing. And we're very excited to be at the show and see all of you guys. And definitely there's going to be a moment where we're going to be doing like some signings and stuff like that. So come and hang out with us for an hour. We really can't wait.
Yeah, so we'll be doing. There's a creator area that you can come hang out. We can jam games. We'll also have there's a stamp program. So if you are, you can get this cool stamp passport, and a bunch of different creators at MagicCon Vegas have a stamp, and you can collect all of the stamps. And I believe there's some cool stuff that happens if you get all of the stamps. You got to catch them all. That's that's the way it goes. And it's based on previous events. They've done big signings on these playmats that they've done, and they have done really well. So I definitely recommend checking that out as well. And now we are talking the top 5 cards in Wilds of Eldraine. And the first one we're going to talk about is actually 5 additional cards. I snuck some cards in here, Ben.
Oh, no.
It's called Land, the land cycle. I have Restless Biovac here, but these are a series of creature lands that all for living in the spirit of the original cycle from Zendikar. Though these are the enemy colored ones, so maybe better than the last time, because the last time they were all pretty mediocre. We have basically they're all a land that enters the battlefield tapped. Then when it untaps, you can tap it for one of 2 different colors. The combos are red white, white black, black green, green blue, and blue red. But the difference here is that you can then spend some amount of mana to turn them into a creature of some varying size. But the difference between this one and other ones is that separate from that ability, separate from becoming a creature, the lands always have, when this land attacks, do a thing. And the reason that's relevant is that if you have any cards that can turn lands into creatures for whatever reason that have nothing to do with their activated ability, they still get to hold that activated ability. So some of them are good enough as the original creature lands were. Now, sadly, Celestial Colonnade hasn't been playable in Modern for many a moon now, and I'm depressed about it still. But beyond just that, this offers some combo potential, because if there's any effects that can turn lands into creatures, they now get really, really cool activated or triggered abilities once they attack along with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at these 5, so correct me if I'm wrong here, the original 5 obviously were from Worldwake. They were allied colored. So you had Celestial Colonnade, and you had I'm sure the names of the other ones, Stirring Wildwood,
Creeping Tar Pit, Stirring Wildwood, Raging Ravine, and one other one.
It's the black and red one, the plus expo.
Dragon Skull, whatever.
No,
it has fire breathing.
It's called whatever. It's the bad one. Anyway, so that was the original set. The second set that we got happened. We got like the black white life gain one and the black green death touch one. I think they were from the second Zendikar.
Blue red had the activated ability where it could become a 4/1 or a 1/4, and it went infinite with a few things.
Funeral, I think was the name of it. Yeah, they were significantly worse. Like the
red white 2/1 double strike.
Yeah, that sounds right. The black,
the blue green had 3/3 hexproof.
Yes, I think probably the black white one, the life gain one, was the best one. It was the one I played the most, but it felt like a big step down. Now, the thing that's the most interesting to me is that these ones are all enemy colored. We have not gotten another allied colored one. They went straight to a second set of enemy colored ones,
which to me feels like they're like asking for not forgiveness, but they're remaking the more disappointing cycle, right? I don't think I need a new Celestial Colonnade emotionally, though I would love a modern playable Celestial Colonnade, but I've never had a black-white playable creature land. I guess the black-white one was the one that was playable. I've never had a red-white playable creature land, right?
So let's talk about what they are. So starting with Restless Bivouac, we have red-white enters tapped. It costs white, red 1. It becomes a 2/2 red and white Ox creature until end of turn. It's still a land. Whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Number 2, Restless Cottage. This one is a tapped black-green source. Also rare, obviously. Activation is black-green 2. Becomes a 4/4 black and green horror creature until end of turn. It's still land. Whenever it attacks, create a food token and exile up to one target card from a graveyard, any graveyard. The third one is Restless Fortress. It's white-black. Enters tapped, creates both colors. For black, white 2. Restless Fortress becomes a 1/4 white and black nightmare creature until end of turn. Still land. And when it attacks, defending player loses 2 life. You gain 2 life. That's a nice payoff. Talk about the how we feel about all of them in a second. The blue-red one is called Restless Spire. Enters tapped for just blue-red. No additional mana. Until end of turn, it becomes a 2/1 blue and red elemental creature with, as long as it's your turn, this creature has first strike. It's still land, and whenever it attacks, scry 1. And finally, there is the blue-green one, Restless Vinestalk. For blue-green 3 until end of turn, it becomes a 5/5 green and blue plant creature with trample. It's still land, and whenever it attacks, up to one other target creature you control has base power 3/3 until end of turn. So, of these 5, they're all pretty decent. I think that the attack ability you mentioned is notable. For me, not surprisingly, the Is It one's my favorite. I like that it's cheap. I think like a 2/1 with some upside is pretty good. That's the one I like the most. What about you?
So I think it's interesting, right? Like the red white one, Restless Biovac, is basically just Raging Ravine, but costing 1 less and doesn't have trample. But then that +1/+1 counter can be put anywhere. It doesn't just have to go on a Raging Ravine. And Raging Ravine has seen a ton of play, right? The fact that this like will slowly get bigger and bigger over time. Restless Cottage has like very decent ability at like just like eating, like stabilizing, and then having some amount of graveyard hate that can be beneficial. So playing one of these in a black-green deck, even in Modern, I think is like a lot more viable than some of the other ones because of the hate card feature to it, where it's like sometimes this card's just gonna be decent for reasons that have nothing to do with the land itself as an attacker. Restless Fortress, I think, has the most combo potential in regards to like what I was talking about before, where like if you just are able to animate a few of these, you can do something really fun with them. The draining life is really powerful for stabilizing as well. Restless Spire, as you mentioned, it's the least expensive to animate. And then Restless Vinestalk being the biggest of these, a 5/5 trample being pretty relevant, and then also possibly pumping or making one of your opponent's creatures that is big enough to block a 5/5 smaller. Is a cool design. The thing that's also interesting in these is, remember, it's not Restless Biovac is 4 mana that it costs you to be able to attack with it, because it's not just the 3 mana that it costs to animate it, but the 1 mana that it costs when you tap it to attack. Sure. That's one of the reasons Celestial Colonnade was so powerful, is it was 5 mana, but it had Vigilance, so you could attack with it and then keep up 1 blue mana or 2 blue mana if you had 6 mana to be able to mana leak or counterspell or remand or whatever. So I definitely think like they all have very interesting features to them. I guess like Restless Spire to me is maybe not as exciting as it is to you, just because like in the early game, 3 mana to get 2/1 in on a tempo play seems pretty bad. I guess like late, it's a great like, I've ran my opponent out of gas, but I don't have a creature anymore, and this allows me to like protect my land as I'm countering all their spells, tempo play, which is good. And scrying lets you make sure you continue to get to the cards you want while your opponent does it. So maybe I like it more than I was thinking.
I think the reason I like that card is because I don't believe any of the 5 of these are more than a 1 of. There's a chance if the right deck comes along where you're trying to like specifically take advantage of the card, it's more than a 1 of. But I think for the most part, they're all the like land 22, land 23 kind of card. So if I'm thinking of like Murktide or something, or any blue-red tempo deck, and I play the blue-red one, I'm sort of like, well, okay, the downside is that I have this tapped land, which I don't want. But the upside is that for not much, like for the lowest cost of any creature land in the history of creature lands, right? 2 mana. You're talking Treetop Village, like Fairy Conclave, like that is the literal upfront cost of the original 5. I'm getting a 2/1 creature, potentially with first strike. And it also gives me 2 colors. So as like a 2/1, I'm sort of like, I mean, it's not Colonnade, because Colonnade, the vigilance thing and the style of deck it played in is very specific, but it just feels to me like the card that if it's in my deck and in my hand, I'm the most willing to celebrate it being in my deck than basically any of the other ones, because none of the other ones feel like they have a distinct place. Whereas I think the blue red one is just like, yeah, there's a lot of situations where this is going to be like land 22 that I'm kind of happy it's there.
It also like if you get fatal pushed, which isn't as relevant in modern. I guess like the others is a 2/1 just like dies the lightning bolt or a bowmaster. Like that, those are
But like
pretty
most
relevant
of
to
these,
me.
but like most of these die to lightning bolt. Bowmaster's
Well,
different, but
well, only two of them do, right?
it's
Only
like
the
one and
and one
two
of them
do.
only dies to lightning bolt after the during the first and second time it attacks. Like Restless Spire and Biovac, the Jeskai ones die to lightning bolt, but Restless Fortress 1/4, Restless Cottage 4/4, and but more importantly, Restless Spire also dies to Bowmaster, right? Like the fact that you can just Bowmaster and ruin, like Bowmastering to Stone Rain someone seems so bad for you.
That's fair. That's fair. Like, yeah, but I guess I guess I wouldn't have said that I think the 2/1 is the best one in the cycle. It's my favorite. I also don't think any of these are exceptionally good. I think they're all like
Well,
interestingly good.
yeah, I
You
don't
think you
know if
think
I
one is
totally
like
disagree.
exceptionally?
I think like the green black one could see play. I think that the blue red one might see play if Bowmaster gets banned. The green blue one like is just because the cycle that these to me more have to compare to is the monocolored Dungeons and Dragons set ones, right? Like which we haven't really talked about, like Frost Giants, Hall of the Frost Giants, right? And
They're
that I think
incredibly
Restless
good. Yeah.
Vinestock is worse. And I think that like yeah, so that's I think the real thing holding him back. But all right, next card. We spent a lot of time. I snuck 5 cards in there, so that was a bonus 10 minutes. Next card is The End. This is the sequel card to famously Once Upon a Time. 2 black instant. This spell costs 2 less to cast if your life total is 5 or less. Exile target creature or planeswalker. Search its controller's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with the same name as that permanent and exile them. That player shuffles, then draws a card for each card exiled this way from their hand. For each card exiled from their hand this way. So early game, 4 mana, exile removal spell, but get rid of combo potential. If they're playing a Primeval Titan deck, remove all the Primeval Titans that they might have as backup plans. If they're playing, though they've already played one, if they're playing a Yawgmoth deck, get rid of all of the Yawgmoths in their deck. So great against combo decks, okay against decks that are having creatures that are beating you down in the face. But also good at eating planeswalkers. And then late game, if you are on the back foot, 2 mana to do that, which is of course very powerful.
So one thing that I think is interesting, and you tell me if I'm wrong about this, search their opponent's library for any number of cards. The same name means if you want to exile the prime time, but not get the ones out of the deck, they draw less cards, right? That's a gamble you play.
Um,
Because it states any number, it doesn't say all of. It says any number, which means I could just exile your prime time.
If they have Primeval Titans in their hand and you don't want them to draw cards, you can't. If it's only the cards in their hand that they will replace with card draw. So like if you remove a Primeval Titan in their deck or graveyard, they don't draw cards off of those.
Point being, if I'm like, you can cast your prime time next turn, I just don't want you to have cards now. I can choose to just like 4 2 mana if I have 5 or less life, just instant speed, exile your thing, and say it's all good. I think like there is interesting potential for this card. I think that obviously 5 or less life. One thing I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think we've learned over the years that the whole like 5 or less, 3 or less life stipulation, it doesn't usually play into competitive play. It's actually very rare that actually matters. If you go back to like Fateful Hour from Dark Ascension, or you go back to like Convalescent Care, which was you get like basically a 3 mana arena gain 5 life from, I think it was like, I can't even remember, like one of those sets around like Odyssey. It was a white enchantment. Those whole like, if you have a low life total, this cool thing happens. It's not a very common effect. And when it is, it's not usually good competitively. Like, I think all those cards have kind of been bad. So what this feels like is if I'm reading it on its face value, I have to treat it as a 4 mana instant that does this. And if this costs 4, it's just fine. It's okay. It's not great. It's all right.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
I think the fact that when you need it to, it is less expensive is helpful. And I think that I wish it exiled all other things in play. That's the one thing that if it extended to being able to do that and like eat tokens, I think that would be really great. Next card is Agatha's Soul Cauldron. 2 mana legendary artifact. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate abilities of creatures you control. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have all activated abilities of all creatures cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Tap it to exile target card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So at a top level, lets you, fixes your mana for activated abilities, but more importantly, lets you, graveyard hate, graveyard hate once a turn, tap it to exile a card and then put a counter on something. So it has like a little bit of a less expensive, but you can't do it multiple times in the same turn, Scavenging Ooze. But then on the other hand, there's definitely some combo potential with being able to give creatures with +1/+1 counters on them all of the activated abilities of cards you've exiled with her. Yawgmoth decks being one that jumps out to me the quickest, where if you are able to like say they kill your Yawgmoth or it's discarded or self-milled or something like that, and you use Agatha's Soul Cauldron to exile your own Yawgmoth, now all of your Undying creatures have the ability of Yawgmoth.
So how does this work with like the whole like Soul Flare, like what the heck's the name of the one that Necrotic Ooze? I'm just like trying to remember what those cards do. Aren't those like you get like lots of abilities, except they're only for the creatures in your graveyard? Is that the deal?
Correct.
So like
Yeah, they don't. This does not work with those. It's
okay,
better in the sense that it's 2 mana on its face value, does things that are nice, versus 4 mana, and you have to have things in your graveyard to make it work. It is worse in the sense that like the old Necrotic Ooze combo of having Quill Spike and one other one in your graveyard lets you just go infinite. But this lets you do kind of cool other things that you want to be able to do with it. So there's definitely a different vibe.
It feels adjacent to Mimic Vat in a way that's like utilitarian in the same way, where like I can instant speed exile a card from a graveyard. There's like sort of some upside, but the fact this costs 2 can be activated for free and doesn't really care about the outcome, whereas VAT is like a little more expensive, cost a bit to activate. There's cool abilities, but like
I think this is significantly better than VAT in the sense that like this has multiple ways to go infinite. It's 2 mana for an exile graveyard effect, where Mimic Vat is 3 mana to if someone's creature dies, you get to exile it, and then at 6 mana you get to start copying things. Or after investing 6 mana into it, you get to copy your first thing. Well, this is more like, if I do this, I tap it, I untap, I tap it again, I won, depending on what you're playing. I think this is a little bit more.
Yeah, I think your point about VAT there is correct. I think I was trying to think of cards that felt similar in their play pattern, and I think VAT is the much weaker version, which I think is why probably VAT has become so much less played in any format, even like Commander, which I think was probably its sweet spot format. And I think this card feels like the pushed, much more utilitarian version of the same card, not because it does the same thing, but
I just think it does something totally different, right? Like what VAT was trying to do is like, I gain value and get to make a token every turn. This is like, I'm trying to use this hate piece to then create a win condition out of like having the activated abilities of multiple creatures that go infinite once you put them on the same creature.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. You're dead right. Like it is a totally different card. I think my response to it and comparing it is more like, it's a card that comes down that has this sort of marginal reactive ability that gives you advantage based on graveyard interactions, and it's much cheaper. So while that is like trying to create a token for you or do something like that, this is much more stripped down, much more streamlined. It's just, I think the play pattern in terms of 1, 2, 3 reminds me of it. I know it's not the same thing. It just feels like
it's definitely is a vat. There's a big vat of witch's liquid in the artwork.
Yeah.
It's like I see a big bucket and I think Mimic Vat. I don't know what you want from me.
This card is good. I'll be honest. I opened this card, and like when I first opened all my packs, I put this in my bulk rares, and then I saw it, and I was like, "Oh, this card's good. I missed this."
The next card that said is Beseech the Mirror. 1 black, sorcery, bargain. Search your library for a card, exile it face down, then shuffle it. If this spell was bargained, which means you sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token, you may instead cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost if that spell's mana value is 4 or less. 4 mana, base, bare level, tutor for any card put in your hand. 4 mana, if you bargain it, find a card that's 4 or less mana and put it into play for free. So you need your extra Shieldreds, you need your extra things, you get them.
It reminds me, like, obviously on its worst face as Diabolic Tutor, right? Like nothing else goes right. You're just playing 1 more black for a Diabolic. The flip side is that you're getting the sort of like Sidisi upside of I sacrifice a creature and now something good happens. But in this case, you're getting like a really good thing. I feel like from the combo perspective, this is obviously the best card in the set. It's sort of when we talked about in the beginning of the show, that the pushed thing, the one card that's pushed. Like this is a very obvious. If you do the right thing in the right deck, this card is nuts. That's how I feel.
It to me, it's Bring to Light, but in with an easier requirement in 1 color, harder to maybe cast because it's 3 black versus blue green, but it costs 4 mana versus 5 mana, and it's in the better color.
It's anything, not just there's 3 types on Bring to Light. This is anything.
Yeah. You search, exactly. It's anything. Well, it also is like it's a 4 mana thing, which Bring to Light is generally around that. So I think right. I think Beseech the Mirror is definitely very powerful. It is not my pick for most powerful card in the set, but it is my pick for second most powerful card in the set.
There's another card. Wait. Hang on. I was like, what the heck are you going to be hoping is better than this card? Because like I feel like this is clearly the best card. So like there's got to be some like modern.
This card is seeing legacy play already. This card is seeing modern play already. This card is seeing play in multiple formats. It is a famous tale of a boy wanting to find a golden goose in the sky. And on his way there, he has to go up the beanstalk. 1 green enchantment. When up the beanstalk enters the battlefield, and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. So it ends up that when you play a 2 mana green permanent, that draws you a card, and then every time you cast anything with Delve or any X spell cost in it, or Adventure, or any of those, like this spell kind of casts more mana when you cast it. Spells, you draw an extra card. It's good. That also includes stuff like in Legacy, Force a Will.
Wow.
That also includes the Evoke creatures.
Holy. Wait. So wait. If you evoke. Oh, not the original ones, but like you're saying, like Fury, like the guys that. Sure. Yeah.
If you let me confirm this to make sure I'm not crazy. This
no, I think you're correct. I was thinking Shriekmon, Muldrifter. You're talking about Fury and Subtlety and those guys.
Yeah. I'm talking about the modern Evoke. The creatures. The other Evoke ones work too, right? Like, but if you have this in play, you drew a card, and then on your next turn or that same turn, you exile a red card and cast Fury. You've now drawn 2 cards and killed 4 of your opponent's X1s.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I mean, so this is actually a very unique experience, guys, because it's very rare that an uncommon is the agreed upon best card in the set. I have to be honest, I think personally I'd put Beseech the Mirror above this, but it doesn't feel like we're more than 1 card off. I feel like we're talking about 1A, 1B. So the idea that an uncommon would be so close to being the best card in the set compared to a mythic rare is, I don't know where it comes from, but it's a surprise for me.
We've often very much disagreed on that point. I'm a big firm believer that I would bet that uncommons and commons are often more commonly going to be better cards than mythics for stuff like modern, because that's where you find like offer you can't refuse. Is that common and uncommon? Like you find what?
Like the marginal upside. It's like
that's where you find the fatal pushes, right? Like the more likely card to see play in modern is the 1 mana removal spell than like the 4 mana mythic, right? But
sure.
In this case, I don't think it's close. I think this card, like with what modern is doing currently, does such insane value things with those things. Not to mention just like we haven't gone into the fact that like in an Enchantress deck, this costs you 2 cards. At worst, this draws you 1 card, right? It's so versatile. And as a card draw engine with some of the stuff that's going on and stuff, it just like does really powerful things all the time. And that doesn't even get into the world of like when you start adding stuff is free, or like people are now playing, what's the Delve counterspell?
Logic Knot?
People are playing Logic Knot over Counterspell now, because with Logic Knot and up the Beanstalk, you can start exiling spells in your graveyard to draw cards off of the 2 mana still, right? So like
Sure.
people are doing silly things because just being able to draw a bonus card off of your random spells and free spells is so powerful. Where I think Beseech the Mirror is good, I think Beseech the Mirror needs very specific decks in Modern to see play, right? I don't like in Standard and in Pioneer, maybe Beseech the Mirror is going to see a ton of play because it finds you Sheoldred, right? Like the fact that it is Sheoldred 5 through 8 is like extremely powerful in a format where the entire format is about finding Sheoldred. Though I do think the end removes that as a little bit of a problem. But in Modern, we're getting triple black for a sorcery 4-drop and having a token in play to get like your combo piece is very good. And there's going to be decks that play it versus like, you know, a 2-mana value engine that just values your opponent out by playing the already so powerful spells in the format that I've argued in the past that they've ruined Modern.
I feel like a 2-mana spell that draws a card, it's a good barometer for like how good does this card have to be to actually be good if it already comes down for 2 mana and draws you a card? And the answer is like, well, this is pretty good, and like you can certainly structure your deck around it, but you don't have to be as all in on it if you want. It's pretty good that just like for 2, it draws you a card just on its face value. I mean, think about Spreading Seas. In the old days of Modern, that was a very staple card. In Merfolk today, it's still good. So that's what that card does, right? It's a very marginal effect for 2 mana at sorcery speed, draws you a card. And then the upside is it has this amazing impact on the game. And I think Beanstalk feels more powerful than that for sure.
Yeah, I think it's like the legacy deck I was seeing wasn't even going so deep in it, right? It was just playing Leyline, four Leyline bindings, 3 Terminuses, 4 Force of Wills, and a 4th of Erelongus, which is an X red white spell that makes a bunch of 2/2s that attack, and 4 Beanstalks. And just the idea of like Leyline binding and Force of Will with Beanstalk is enough to outvalue your opponent in Legacy.
Yeah, I mean,
right? Like that's the other one, Laurelin Revealed, is the other card that's so good with it. The fact that like your land late game now draws you 4 cards for 5 mana is its own little.
And for the listeners that are like, what are those cards? Lorien Revealed is one of the commons from Lord of the Rings. It's like part of the land cycling cards. It's the blue one. It's 1 blue cycle for an island, and for blue 3 draws you 3 cards. 4th Erlingus is this 4 mana card that came from a commander deck that has like a create tokens effect for red white X. And I mean, both are very good, but like we're kind of in the era now of people realizing the best cards from Lord of the Rings, and that's 2 of the best cards right there. And they both make Beanstalk extremely powerful. So
Yep. So and you know, as we said at the beginning, we've definitely missed some cards. Like the adventure mechanic makes it so hard to evaluate what card is actually like what of these like weird 2 combos of cards end up actually seeing play in Modern. But I do think like on the whole, they tried playing it a lot safer this time around than they did last time we were in Eldraine. I think they like Eldraine the first time was a classic example of like a new permanent type finally breaking, and that was artifact tokens, right? Where like before, clues, because they had card draw attached, wizards assumed they would be powerful, so they were pretty safe with them. Treasures, they knew what a lettuce petal was worth, so they were very safe with treasures. But with food, they were like, oh, artifacts that like cost 3 mana to gain life, that's not a good thing. That's like mostly that's really flavorful, but who cares? We can just like let Oko make food once a turn for a plus, and we can have this other card make 6 food tokens or what, you know, or 3, I think was the maximum. But and then they realized like, oh, right, who cares about the life gain feature a lot of the time? These are just really powerful to make a bunch of artifact tokens for a below rate, and add the layer that, and gaining life. Gaining life is one of the like mechanics I think Wizards has made mistakes on the most, because inherently gaining life is bad until it's attached to something that's good, and then it's problematic, right? Like Sphinx's Revelation being a great example in Standard, where Blue Sun Zenith literally printed a year before, 2 years before, not played once, right? Didn't see any play. Blue, X, draw X cards. But you add life gain to it, and now it's a stabilizing force. Another thing I did not only lets me get ahead.
It costs one less. I mean, it costs one less. That's ridiculous.
No, it was white, blue, or it's blue, white, X. Same mana cost, just white. It was gold.
You're right.
So adding that life gain sustainability to a card that's already like playable is what brings stuff over the top. So food tokens broke that. And so I think them looking at this set, that added to, just Once Upon a Time being broken and the like history of bannings at that point in Modern, they pulled back a little bit. They're like, we're going to be a little safer in this set. But even then, I think there's like some really powerful cards. I think like Hearth Elemental, Up the Beanstalk, Beseech the Mirror are all, even Sir Ginger and Agatha all have like potential to do really powerful things in the format in like pretty innocuous ways. But I am interested because famously, Eldraine, one of the most broken sets of all time, right? And in a series of some of the most broken sets of all time. But also famously, Ixalan, one of the most underpowered sets of all time. No cards from that set are worth anything. Other than like subtypal reward cards. And but we're going to Ixalan next, and I would not be surprised if we have a reverse problem. I'm predicting we're going to get some broken AF cards going into Ixalan. Because they're going to swing the wrong way. They're going to be like, oh, we need to make dinosaurs and pirates so powerful that like no one's going to not play them in Standard. And then he'll be like, this is miserable.
What is your feeling on Eldraine overall? Like scale of 1 to 10. Like, what do you think the power level is?
Power level? I would put it, I mean, it's a 7, Ben. It's a power level of a 7, classic.
Just like medium, marginal, sort of
medium,
like,
but like very good, but very medium, actually not committing to it. I think like if like we're actually using the 1 through 5 scale, like let's get rid of 10, right? 1 through 5. 1 through 5 stars, what is the power level? Yeah. I would say this is a 3.
Okay, so on above, but not below.
Yeah, I think it's not anywhere near a bad set. It's not terrible. I could be proven wrong because I think some of these cards are really powerful, and adventure cards have bitten people in the past is how valuable, the good they are. But I think on the whole, and with that being said, I think like in the last year, I would say that like Dominaria United was a 2. It would be a 1 if Shieldred wasn't in the set. The All Will Be 1 is probably also a 2. March of the Machines was probably a 4. Lord of the Rings was a 4, right? So like I 3 is pretty good.
Yeah, I think you're probably correct. I think DU was probably actually a 1. But I think it's the high end of the 1 with Shieldred, because I don't think there was basically anything else. So I feel like the other estimates are probably correct, like Lord of the Rings. But I think looking at DU, like what do I hope to open if I open a pack of it? It's sort of like there's only one card in the whole set. There's like the Lotus. Otherwise, that's why I think it was probably a 1. I like the set a lot, but I think your estimation of this set is correct. If you ask me the same question, I'd agree it's a 3. I think that's about right. I don't think it's so good that it's a 4, but it feels to me like it's more on the edge of 4. It feels like it's closer to a 4 than a 3, but I would still land on a 3.
Yeah, I could see this being a 4, right? Like I think there's enough cards in here that are very powerful that if they actually turn out and see Modern play, like it's a 4. And I think a 4 is good. I think you don't want Magic sets to be 1, 2s, and 5s. Right?
I think 5 is a problem.
Yeah. 5 is a problem, and 1s and 2s are like 1s are arguably a problem, and 2s are boring. Right? Like 3 and 4, sweet spot. Yeah, maybe you'd rather a 4 once in a while, but even then, like too many 4s, like Fire Design 4s were a problem. Give me a nice 3. The other thing that's really cool, like, is not only is it exciting to open these really flavorful cards, the stories that are being told on the cards, but the Enchanting Tales sheet, which, you know, is the bonus sheet that we had artifacts in Brothers War. We had the legendary creatures in March of Machines. The Enchanting Tales sheet of all these really cool enchantments, I think makes limited amazing. I love that sheet. I love that in Strixhaven. I love that in those other sets. It makes the like cool stuff you get to open in packs really exciting too. Like you're more likely to have something that's exciting when you're opening a pack than just like random standard stuff that might not make it, because these are fan favorites throughout time. Every pack has a card that has seen constructive play at some point, right? And so I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that like the trend is really strong for those sheets. I think something like master sets, I think, kind of complicate that, but I think that overall, that when you're dealing with just regular standard sets that have like a reprint sheet, I think like giving us that is kind of it's like what I expect the future to be, I guess. It feels like that's kind of where I feel, if I'm guessing, Wizards will focus. And I thought that opening the Enchanted Tales sheet was great. Did you open any of the confetti cards or no?
I opened a confetti card. I opened Aggravated Assault.
Was it amazing? Was it so sick?
Yeah, it's really pretty. I think it's like great. Oh no, I already put it in a deck. I opened that, and then a foil Beseech the Mirror were like my two.
Because I like opened cards I thought were cool, but I was like super sad I did not open a confetti card. So I saw one of our friends, Joe Johnson, who does Tabletop Jocks. He opened like a land tax confetti foil. I was like, oh my god, that's sick.
That's sick. I mean, basically, like I put Aggravated Assault right into. I actually opened 4 of them. Like I got a full playset of it, but only one of them was confetti. And I went right into Obosh, Rayhan, Jessica, which is like needs the extra attack steps to do cool things.
So sick, yeah.
But thank you so much, everyone, for listening today. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and comment if we think there's a card we missed that you think is going to be powerful enough to see play in Modern, or comment if we thought a card that's definitely going to be able to see play is trashed here, and we don't know what we're talking about. Make sure to check out more information about Wilds of Eldraine in the Bitly links below, and make sure to pick Ben's because he needs the clicks.
I need the help. Give me the clicks.
You can't let me win. And then we'll see everyone at MagicCon Vegas. We're super hyped. We'll be there all day Saturday, doing fun things. We'll be there Friday, and Ben will be there all day Sunday. And we're hyped to hang out and do some fun stuff. And make sure to check out the panel I have on Saturday. Thanks everyone, and we'll talk to you all next week.
Bye guys.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.